The first rays of sunlight filtered through the thick curtains, casting golden stripes across the penthouse floor. The city outside was slowly waking, unaware that within these walls, a storm of desire and confusion had left its mark. Jaehyun stirred, the weight of the night pressing down on him like a hand he could not shake off. He opened his eyes, expecting the cold emptiness of his bedroom. But it wasn't empty. She was there, Amara, his maid. Her presence was soft, yet overwhelming, like a tide pulling him under. She lay beside him, hair spilling across the pillow in dark waves, skin glowing in the morning light, and lips slightly parted as if inviting him back into the haze of last night. His chest tightened. His heartbeat thundered against his ribcage, a confusing mix of lust, guilt, and disbelief. He tried to remember, but the memories were tangled, fragmented flashes of skin, heat, whispered laughter, and her touch. He remembered the kiss, soft at first, then searing, relentless. The rest was a blur of desire that left him trembling. "Sir." Her voice was low, melodic, teasing in the gentlest way. He blinked, focusing on the sound. She was awake, and somehow, the calmness of her gaze made the fire of his confusion burn hotter. He swallowed hard, voice caught in his throat. What happened?" Amara's lips curved into a smile that was innocent and dangerous all at once. She leaned closer, brushing her fingers through his hair. "You don't remember?" she asked, a soft laugh escaping her, the kind that sent shivers down his spine. "No," he croaked, his own voice foreign to him in its weakness. He was used to control, to commanding fear and respect, but right now he was powerless. Her presence was intoxicating, her nearness a storm he could not resist. She had always been beautiful, but after last night, she was a weapon he could not defend against. His chest ached with the memory of her, and yet there was a strange warmth, something dangerously human that he had almost forgotten he possessed. Amara brushed her lips against his ear, a whisper that felt like fire. "It's okay, you're safe." Safe. The word struck him as irony. How could he feel safe when every fiber of him remembered the chaos of passion, the betrayal he didn't fully see yet, and the looming presence of a wife who could only ever be a devil in disguise? He tried to push her away, tried to regain the command he was known for. But his hands betrayed him, lingering over the softness of her arms, the curve of her shoulders. He wanted to curse, to shout, but his mind refused to cooperate. Amara leaned back, eyes glimmering with something he couldn't name. Concern, curiosity, or just the quiet, disarming confidence of someone who had seen too much, yet stayed gentle. "You don't have to understand right now," she said softly, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "Just breathe." He obeyed, almost against his will, letting her hands guide him as if she had always known how to calm the chaos inside him. And in that moment, something shifted. Something primal, tender, and unexplainable. The memory of Sumin, his wife, hit him like a sharp blade. The woman he had married not for love but for business. The woman who had smiled, laughed, and tempted him, while hiding daggers behind her eyes. And yet here he was, lying beside Amara, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in years. A kind of intimacy that was pure, unforced, and devastatingly sweet. Amara noticed the shadow cross his face, the tightening of his jaw. She didn't speak of it, didn't ask questions, but simply held her space beside him. Her presence alone made him feel human, vulnerable, alive. He reached out, brushing his fingers along her arm, marveling at the softness, the life that seemed to radiate from her very being. He wanted to pull her closer, to feel her against him again, but fear held him back. Fear of crossing boundaries, fear of losing control, fear of the chaos that had already begun. And yet, she smiled, leaning into his touch, letting him feel her warmth without pressing him further. That simple act, her trust, her gentleness, was more intoxicating than any wine, more dangerous than any enemy he had faced. The world outside continued its indifferent motion, unaware that in this room, hearts and loyalties had shifted, blurred, and tangled in ways neither of them could fully comprehend. The first moments of sunlight had never felt so heavy, so intimate, so charged with a mix of desire and uncertainty. Jae-hyun closed his eyes, letting himself savor the quiet, letting himself feel the aftershocks of last night without understanding them. He couldn't name what he felt. Anger, lust, confusion, or perhaps a dangerous kind of hope, but it was overwhelming, undeniable. Amara's hand rested over his, a silent promise, a bridge between calm and chaos. And though he did not yet know it, the choices made in these early hours, quiet, tender, intoxicating, would ripple outward, touching deals, betrayals, and secrets that he had long thought untouchable. For now, though, there was only this moment, only her, only the strange, sweet aftermath of a night that neither of them could fully explain, and yet neither would forget. And as he held her hand, letting her warmth seep into his bones, he realized the world had changed, even if he didn't yet know how. The morning light stretched lazily across the penthouse, brushing against the polished floors and golden decor. Jae-hyun still felt the heavy pull of last night, the remnants of desire and confusion knotting in his chest. He had dressed in a haze, his mind unable to organize the sequence of events. Every memory a blur, every touch a lingering echo that refused to fade. Amara moved around the kitchen quietly, humming softly, the smell of sizzling eggs and brewed coffee wrapping around him like a warm blanket. He leaned against the doorframe, still in his robe, watching her. She was calm, graceful, and impossibly beautiful, her movements deliberate yet effortless. Her long hair fell over her shoulders like a waterfall, and the sunlight caught in it, highlighting streaks of mahogany and gold that made him momentarily forget the chaos of the night. "You should eat," she said gently, placing a plate of eggs and toast in front of him. Her voice was soft, soothing, yet somehow commanding, as if she had always been in control without him ever noticing. He hesitated, hand hovering over the plate. Every instinct screamed at him that this was dangerous, that being near her, touching her, even looking at her was risky. And yet, something in him wanted nothing more than to be close, to feel the quiet presence she offered. "Thank you," he muttered, his voice low, almost embarrassed. Amara's smile was small, careful, almost unreadable. She took a step back, letting him eat, letting him decide whether to cross the invisible line that had formed between them. But as she moved, the scent of her perfume, subtle yet intoxicating, wrapped around him like a gentle chain. He watched her without realizing it, memorizing the curve of her neck, the grace of her hands, the delicate way she balanced the plates and cups. Every gesture was mesmerizing, pulling him deeper into a web of quiet temptation he couldn't fight. Amara noticed his gaze but didn't comment. She had seen it before, the way he observed people, the way he studied them. But now it was different. Now, she could feel the undercurrent of desire, confusion, and something more tender, something vulnerable, behind those sharp, dark eyes of his. After a long, tense silence, he finally spoke, voice rough. "Amara? Last night, did it mean anything?" She paused, the spatula hovering over the stove. She didn't look at him immediately. When she finally met his gaze, her eyes were calm, almost unreadable. "It was a moment," she said softly. "A complicated moment." He frowned, frustration rising in him. "A moment? That's it? Nothing more?" She smiled faintly, a mixture of sweetness and caution. "Nothing more, unless you want it to be." Her words struck him like fire. He stepped closer, drawn in by the quiet pull of her presence. The room seemed to shrink around them, the air thick with tension, unspoken desires, and a strange kind of trust he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He reached out, hesitating for a moment before letting his fingers brush against hers. The touch was electric, subtle yet devastating, and he felt a shiver run through his body. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let him feel the warmth of her hand, the softness of her skin, the quiet reassurance that she was there, that she was steady, that she could be safe. "Amara," he breathed, voice low, trembling slightly. "I." She placed a finger gently against his lips, stopping him. "Shoo," she whispered. "Not now. Just feel it. Just be." And for a long moment he did. He let himself feel her presence, her calm, her warmth. He let himself lean into the comfort she offered, The quiet intimacy that didn't demand, that didn't manipulate, that simply existed. It was intoxicating, dangerous, and it was exactly what he needed. After breakfast, they moved through the penthouse in silence, the tension between them humming like an unspoken melody. Every glance, every brush of skin, every subtle movement carried weight. He wanted to ask questions, to probe, to figure out the truth, but every time he opened his mouth, he faltered. Every time he tried, he found himself distracted by the softness of her hair, the curve of her shoulder, the quiet power in the way she moved. By mid-morning, he found himself in the library, trying to focus on documents, deals, and numbers. But the world blurred around him. Every shadow, every sound, every thought led him back to her. He could almost feel her in the room, almost smell the warmth of her skin, almost hear the quiet hum of her laughter. Amara entered with coffee, setting the cups down gently. He looked up, caught in her gaze, and the world seemed to stop. He wanted to speak, to ask her why she was here, why she stayed, why she didn't run from the chaos he carried. But all that came out was a soft, almost inaudible, "Thank you." She smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. "You don't have to thank me," she said. "I just want you to be okay." Her words hit him harder than he expected. In this world of power, betrayal, and danger, no one had ever cared about him in this way. Not his wife, not his allies, not even his closest associates. But here she was, calm, kind, unwavering. And he realized, perhaps with a mix of fear and longing, that he trusted her more than he had trusted anyone in years. For the first time, he let himself imagine a life where he could be just Jae-hyun. Not the feared mafia boss, not the calculating strategist, not the untouchable man of power. Just him with Amara. Just him feeling something real, something tender, something that wasn't coated in lies, danger, or deception. And as the morning stretched into afternoon, filled with quiet conversations, shared glances, and stolen moments of proximity, he felt something stir deep inside him. A connection that was unexpected, undeniable, and sweetly dangerous. Little did he know that this connection, delicate as it was, would soon collide with the chaotic world he ruled. But for now, in this quiet, sunlit penthouse, amidst the scent of coffee, the warmth of sunlight, and the gentle presence of a woman he never wanted to feel for, Jae-hyun let himself simply exist, lost in a moment that was his and hers alone. Even as the city below roared with life, Jae-hyun felt as though the penthouse existed in a bubble, separate from everything else. The last 2 mornings had left him unmoored, a mixture of lust, confusion, and an unfamiliar softness that he didn't know how to handle. He moved through his office, papers and ledgers spread out before him, yet his thoughts kept returning to Amara. She was in the kitchen again, humming a soft, melodic tune as she prepared lunch. The simplicity of her movements, pouring tea, slicing fruit, arranging a small salad, held him captive. He had never considered a woman's routine so mesmerizing. Every tilt of her head, every glance over her shoulder, every subtle smile tugged at something deep inside him, something he hadn't felt for years. When she noticed his eyes on her, she didn't pull away. Instead, she smiled faintly, a gentle acknowledgement of the tension that neither of them had spoken aloud. There was a quiet power in her, an ease that reminded him that not everything in his life needed to be controlled. He rose from his chair, moving closer to the kitchen, pretending to look at the files in his hands. But every step brought him nearer, every heartbeat made it harder to breathe. She turned, her eyes meeting his, and for a moment, the world around them disappeared. "You're distracted," she said softly, her voice a combination of observation and teasing. He began, faltering. The words he wanted to say, the ones that could expose his vulnerability, stuck in his throat. He wasn't used to feeling like this. He wasn't used to wanting someone simply for their presence, for their warmth, for the softness of their smile. Amara took a step closer, the scent of her hair and perfume enveloping him, drawing him in. "It's okay," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything. Just be here." Her words were like honey on fire. He wanted to reach for her, to touch her, to hold her close and never let go. Yet every instinct warned him to stop. But desire, once ignited, refused to be restrained. His hand brushed against hers, a tentative, electrifying touch that sent a shiver up his spine. She didn't pull away. She let him feel the warmth of her skin, the soft pulse beneath her fingers, the quiet invitation that was as thrilling as it was dangerous. "I can't," he admitted, voice low and rough, betraying the vulnerability he had fought so hard to hide. "Yes," she said simply, leaning closer, her lips barely grazing his ear. "You can." The world contracted to the space between them. He could feel her breath, soft and intoxicating, her hand lingering just above his, teasing, drawing him into the storm of emotions he couldn't name. For a fleeting moment, all he was Jae-hyun, a man unmasked, unshielded, alive in a way that power and violence had never allowed. Lunch passed in a blur of quiet glances and unspoken tension. They moved around each other, each gesture, each shared smile, pulling them closer without a single word of confession. Even in silence, there was communication. A language of glances, brushes of skin, and stolen breaths that left him breathless. By mid-afternoon, he found himself unable to focus on anything else. The ledger, the deals, the empire he ruled. It all faded as he watched her move through the penthouse, graceful and precise, yet completely unaware of the effect she had on him. Amara noticed his gaze again, and this time, she didn't just smile. She stepped closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her body, close enough that her presence threatened to shatter the careful composure he had built over decades of power. "Jae-hyun," she murmured, voice soft and soothing. "You don't have to carry everything alone. You can let go just a little, right here, right now." Her words were a spark that ignited the tinderbox within him. He wanted nothing more than to follow the quiet pull of her hand, to let himself be consumed by the intensity of what they had shared, to feel her lips, her touch, her warmth enveloping him entirely. And yet caution remained. He had learned long ago that desire could be as dangerous as a bullet, and he could not afford mistakes. But even as he wrestled with his instincts, the pull of Amara's presence was irresistible. The air between them was heavy, charged, a delicate balance between temptation and restraint. Why are you like this?" he asked finally, voice trembling with a mix of frustration and awe. She smiled, a mysterious, almost mischievous curve of her lips. "Maybe I'm just human," she said softly. "Maybe I just know how to be here and let you feel." Her words wrapped around him, soft and impossible to resist. He took a step closer, drawn in by her warmth, her presence, her quiet power. She didn't retreat. She didn't flinch. She simply let him near, letting the tension build, letting him taste the forbidden sweetness of being close without crossing the line. Yet, hours passed like this, time stretching and folding in on itself. Every glance, every movement, every subtle brush of skin against skin was electric, leaving him dizzy with desire he could neither name nor suppress. By evening, the penthouse had fallen into a serene hush. The city outside glittered with lights, but within these walls, only the quiet rhythm of their breathing existed, only the soft warmth between them, only the undeniable connection that neither of them dared to define. Jae-hyun found himself seated on the couch, Amara perched beside him, their knees almost touching. The proximity was unbearable, intoxicating, and yet somehow comforting. He wanted to reach out, to close the distance, to let the tension break in a kiss or touch that would leave them both trembling. Instead, he simply sat, letting the quiet moments stretch, letting the warmth of her presence settle into him. And in that silence, in that gentle closeness, he realized something dangerous. He was falling, not in love, not yet, but into a vulnerability he hadn't felt in years. Amara's hand brushed against his, just lightly, almost imperceptibly, yet the effect was devastating. It was a touch that spoke of trust, of comfort, of something more profound than words could convey. And for the first time in his life, Jae-hyun allowed himself to just be, just feel, just exist in a moment of sweetness and connection that was entirely theirs. As the night drew near, the penthouse settled into darkness, the lights of the city twinkling outside. Yet inside, Jae-hyun and Amara sat, quietly entangled in the most gentle, unspoken intimacy. There were no confessions, no promises, no declarations, just the slow, sweet, and seductive pulse of two souls cautiously drawn together, unaware of the storms that would come, yet utterly incapable of resisting the pull that already bound them. The penthouse was quiet, but not silent. Even in the stillness, Jae-hyun felt the pulse of the city below, the constant hum of life that somehow seemed muted in comparison to the storm inside him. He sat in the study, fingers drumming absently against the edge of the desk, mind half on the ledgers before him, half on the memory of Amara. She had moved through the apartment that morning like a soft, radiant presence, humming under her breath, the sunlight catching in her hair, highlighting shades of deep brown that glimmered like polished wood. Each step, each motion, felt purposeful yet effortless, a quiet demonstration of grace that held him captive. He tried to focus on the business calls, the deals he had to manage, but every time he picked up the phone or read a file, his thoughts strayed to her. The way she had leaned over him last night in the kitchen, the soft brush of her hand against his arm, the warmth she exuded without ever trying. It haunted him. And yet, beneath that warmth, there was an underlying tension he couldn't ignore. She had a calm, soothing presence, yes, but there was also something else, a quiet intelligence, a subtle watchfulness. She observed without judgment, cared without interference, and teased without cruelty. That combination was disarming, dangerous even, because it left him exposed in ways no one else ever could. Jae-hyun, her voice, soft and melodic, called from the hallway. He looked up, heart skipping. Amara stood there, holding a tray with 2 cups of tea. She moved closer, placing it on the desk with deliberate care. Her eyes met his, warm and steady, as if she could read every unspoken thought in his mind. "You've been quiet," she said softly, almost teasingly. "Thinking too much?" He swallowed, a tightness forming in his chest. "Maybe," he admitted, voice low. "Maybe too much." She smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Then let me help," she said, reaching to pour a little tea into his cup. Their fingers brushed briefly, a subtle spark that made his pulse quicken. He wanted to hold her hand, to feel that connection linger, but he restrained himself. He had learned over the years that desire without caution could be deadly. And yet, the restraint only made the tension between them more electric. Amara sat down across from him, her posture relaxed, eyes glimmering with quiet amusement. "You know," she said softly, "sometimes people get so caught up in controlling everything that they forget to just live." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He was used to control, used to dominance, used to having the world bend to his will. But in her presence, he felt a pull he couldn't command, a softness he couldn't engineer. He wanted to deflect, to assert his authority, but the gentle intensity in her gaze made him hesitate. "You make it hard to think straight," he admitted, voice rough, almost desperate. Her lips curved in a teasing smile. "Good," she murmured. "Maybe that's what you need." The afternoon passed in quiet companionship. Amara moved through the penthouse with her usual grace, attending to small tasks, bringing him tea, sharing small, unimportant details about her day. Yet every interaction was layered with subtle tension. Glances held just a second too long, touches that lingered just a fraction longer, words spoken with a softness that made him ache. At one point, she sat beside him on the couch while he reviewed files, their knees almost touching. He felt the warmth of her body, subtle yet intoxicating, and he realized that the physical proximity alone was enough to unbalance him. The quiet intimacy was overwhelming, a delicious tension that made him simultaneously cautious and desperate. "Amara," he began, voice low, hesitant. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like to live differently? To be free from all of this?" She looked at him then, eyes steady, almost unreadable, yet warm. "I do," she admitted softly. "Sometimes. But freedom isn't about escaping. It's about knowing where you belong, even if it's complicated." Her words were like a key turning in a lock inside him. He wanted to ask more, to unravel the meaning behind them, to understand how she could be so calm in a world that had always been chaotic. But the words died on his lips, replaced by a shiver that ran through his body. Their conversation dwindled, replaced by quiet companionship. He noticed the little things, the way her fingers lingered on the cup, the subtle glint of her eyes in the sunlight, the gentle rhythm of her breathing. Every detail drew him in, made him more aware of her presence, and more aware of the longing he could no longer deny. As evening fell, the penthouse dimmed in a warm glow. City lights twinkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting in her eyes in a way that made him ache. He was supposed to be in control, supposed to maintain dominance, supposed to be untouchable. And yet, here he was, sitting beside her, drawn into her orbit, feeling a sweetness and tension that was impossible to resist. Amara leaned back slightly, her hand brushing against his as she adjusted herself on the couch. The contact was brief, almost accidental, but it sent a jolt of electricity through him. He wanted to reach out, to pull her closer, to let himself be consumed by the pull between them. But restraint whispered in his mind, always restraint. "Jae-hyun," she whispered, almost in a breath. "You don't have to be strong all the time. You can let someone in. Even just a little." Her words were a quiet challenge, a tender invitation. He wanted to argue, to resist, to maintain his control. But the gentle insistence in her voice, the warmth of her hand, the softness in her eyes, it was impossible. He found himself leaning just a fraction closer, caught between desire and caution, between the need for control and the intoxicating allure of trust. Time seemed to stretch infinitely in that dimly lit penthouse, filled with the quiet rhythm of their shared presence. Every glance, every touch, every breath was a subtle negotiation, a silent acknowledgement of the tension that neither could fully name. And yet, in the midst of it all, Jae-hyun realized something dangerous. He wanted her, not for power, not for desire alone, but for the comfort, the sweetness, the undeniable humanity she offered. As night settled in, the city lights casting a gentle glow across the room, he remained on the couch, hand barely brushing hers, heart pounding with anticipation, confusion, and something deeper he wasn't ready to name. Amara, serene and unflinching, met his gaze, and in that silent exchange, the air between them thrummed with an unspoken understanding. They didn't speak, they didn't move closer yet, but the tension, the sweetness, the seductive undercurrent, wrapped around them like a quiet promise. And in that moment, Jae-hyun knew, without fully understanding how or why, that the next step, whenever it came, would change everything. The penthouse felt warmer than usual that evening, though it wasn't the summer sun or the city lights that made the air heavy. It was the quiet tension between them, the almost tangible pull that neither Jae-hyun nor Amara could ignore. He had spent hours in his office earlier, trying to focus on ledgers, emails, and deals, but every glance at the doorway reminded him that she was there, moving with that effortless grace, humming under her breath, baking some dessert, or tidying the space. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt normal, calm, human, not a mafia boss feared by everyone who knew his name, not a man responsible for dangerous deals, threats, and violence. Just him, just Jae-hyun. And yet, that calmness was layered with fire, a hunger he couldn't explain, a desire that had crept into him over the past days like a silent predator. Amara appeared in the doorway of his office again, holding a tray with a small plate of freshly baked pastries. She was dressed in her usual modest attire, simple yet elegant, and the sight of her made something stir deep inside him. His eyes lingered on the way her fingers delicately held the tray, the subtle sway of her hips as she stepped closer, the soft glint in her eyes that seemed to laugh at his silent fascination. "Tea?" she asked, placing the tray on his desk. "Yeah. Thank you," he murmured, his voice rough. She didn't move away. Instead, she leaned slightly closer, resting her hand on the desk near his, just close enough for him to feel the warmth radiating from her skin. His chest tightened. He wanted to reach out, to brush her fingers with his, to pull her closer and feel the dangerous thrill of proximity. But he didn't. Not yet. Amara's gaze softened, her lips curving into a gentle smile. "You've been distracted all day," she said. "Thinking too much again?" "I can't help it," he admitted, voice low. Everything reminds me of you." She blinked, a quiet flicker of surprise crossing her face, though she quickly masked it with a calm, teasing smile. "Of me?" she asked, her tone playful yet tinged with curiosity. "Yes," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Even when you're not in the room, I feel you here, everywhere." Her smile widened, subtle and knowing, and for a moment, the air between them seemed to shimmer with unspoken desire. She leaned just a little closer so that their shoulders nearly touched. His heart hammered in his chest, a wild rhythm he couldn't control. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to close the distance, to reach for her, to feel the warmth of her skin against his own. "Jae-hyun?" she murmured softly, her hand brushing against his, just barely, a teasing ghost of contact. The touch was electric, sending shivers down his spine, making him acutely aware of every inch of space between them. He swallowed hard, voice trembling slightly. "Amara, She placed a finger gently against his lips, stopping him. "Shoo," she whispered. "Not yet. Just feel it." And he did. He let himself feel the warmth, the pull, the tension that had been building for days. He let himself notice the soft curve of her jaw, the delicate line of her neck, the way her eyes seemed to hold both comfort and fire. He could feel the quiet intimacy between them, a tension that simmered and whispered promises he wasn't ready to name. Hours passed in this delicate rhythm. She moved through the penthouse, performing small tasks, humming quietly while he worked or tried to, his mind perpetually straying to the heat between them. Every glance, every subtle gesture, every brush of skin against skin left him more aware, more restless, more acutely aware of the pull that neither of them wanted to confront. By evening, the city lights reflected in the windows, casting a warm glow across the room. Amara approached him again, this time with a cup of tea and a plate of cookies. She sat beside him on the couch, close enough for their knees to brush lightly. The contact was slight, almost accidental, but the effect was devastating. His body responded before his mind could intervene, every nerve alight with anticipation and tension. Your trouble," he muttered, a half-smile tugging at his lips. "Am I?" she asked, tilting her head, her eyes glinting with mischief. "Maybe, or maybe I just know how to make you feel." He wanted to argue, to push back, to maintain his control, but he couldn't. He found himself leaning just a fraction closer, drawn to her warmth, her presence, her quiet confidence. Every second with her felt charged with possibility, with temptation, with a sweetness he hadn't known he craved. They sat in silence for a while, the room filled only with the soft hum of the city outside and the gentle rhythm of their shared breathing. He could feel the subtle rise and fall of her chest, the warmth radiating from her body, the quiet invitation in her proximity. Every instinct screamed at him to reach out, to close the distance, to let the tension break. But restraint, the voice of reason that had saved his life countless times, whispered to wait. She noticed his hesitation, her hand brushing against his again, slightly firmer this time. It was a silent challenge, a tender provocation. He felt his pulse quicken, the heat between them undeniable. He wanted to pull her closer, to feel her lips, her touch, her warmth entirely. But he stayed still, letting the tension build, savoring every moment. For the first time in years, Jae-hyun allowed himself to be vulnerable. Not in front of his enemies, not in front of his associates, not in front of the world. But here, with Amara, he could simply feel, simply exist, simply be. And that realization, sweet and dangerous, sent a thrill through him that he could not deny. As night deepened, the penthouse settled into quiet intimacy. Amara leaned back slightly, her hand brushing against his once more, lingering just long enough to remind him of the pull between them. He caught her gaze, steady and calm, yet glinting with something unspoken, and he knew that neither of them would forget this day. The heat between them simmered, unspoken yet undeniable, a delicate tension that promised everything or nothing. And Jae-hyun realized, with a mixture of awe, fear, and longing, that the next step, whenever it came, would change everything. Yet he found himself unable to resist the pull that had been quietly building for days. The city outside had settled into a soft hum, the lights twinkling like distant stars. Yet inside the penthouse, the atmosphere was alive, electric with tension, and saturated with quiet anticipation. Jae-hyun sat alone in the study, his mind swirling in thoughts, he hadn't allowed himself to consider until now. He had tried to maintain control over his world, over himself, but every glance, every shared moment with Amara left him more unmoored. He could still feel the lingering warmth of her presence, the subtle way her fingers brushed against his during tea, the soft curve of her smile as she moved through the room. Her simplicity and elegance, her quiet confidence, her ability to exist completely without the pretenses he had grown accustomed to. It was intoxicating. Dangerous, even. A soft knock on the study door broke his reverie. "Come in," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Amara entered, carrying a small tray with 2 cups of hot chocolate. The scent of cocoa and something sweet, the faint aroma of vanilla from her perfume, filled the room, making his chest tighten in ways he couldn't explain. She placed the tray on the desk and set down a cup in front of him, the faint brush of her hand sending shivers down his spine. "You've been quiet all day," she said softly, a teasing note in her voice. "Thinking too much again?" He looked up at her, caught in the depths of her eyes, and almost admitted how restless and distracted he truly was. Instead, he managed a low, "Perhaps." Her smile widened just slightly, as though she knew more than she was letting on, as though she could see the storm behind his controlled exterior. "You don't always have to be so serious, you know?" she murmured. "Sometimes, it's okay to let go. Just a little." Jaehyun's hand hovered near hers, instinctively drawn to the warmth radiating from her skin. He wanted to reach for her, to let his fingers intertwine with hers, to close the small space between them, yet restraint whispered that he should wait. The pull, however, was undeniable. Every beat of his heart demanded closeness, demanded contact, demanded a surrender he hadn't experienced in years. She noticed his hesitation, the almost imperceptible tension in his fingers, and leaned slightly closer. "Jaehyun?" she whispered, her voice low, soft, and laced with an intimacy that made him shiver. "You don't have to pretend with me. Not here. Not now." Her words were a key turning inside him. He was used to command, to power, to fear and respect. But here, in this quiet, softly lit room, all of that melted away. He could feel his walls crumbling under her gaze, under her warmth, under the undeniable sweetness and danger she carried without effort. He reached out, almost imperceptibly, his fingers brushing against hers. The contact was slight, a mere touch, yet it ignited a wildfire in his chest. She didn't pull away. She let her hand rest there for a heartbeat, then another, then a third, letting the heat build silently between them. "You feel it too," he murmured, voice low, almost unrecognizable in its vulnerability. Amara's lips curved into a faint smile. "Yes," she whispered, "but we have to be careful." Her words were cautionary, yet they carried a teasing undertone, a quiet thrill. He wanted to argue, to ignore caution, to surrender entirely to the pull of her presence. And yet, the restraint, the anticipation, the slow burn between them only made the desire more intoxicating. Hours slipped by unnoticed as they moved through the penthouse in a delicate rhythm. She brought him tea, he reviewed documents, but their proximity was charged. Every brush of skin, every shared glance, every quiet word steeped with tension. The air between them seemed to hum, alive with a quiet seduction that neither could name but both could feel. At one point, they found themselves in the living room, sitting across from each other on the couch. Her knee brushed against his accidentally, or maybe not, and the small contact sent a jolt through him. He caught her gaze, and for a long moment, neither spoke. Words felt unnecessary. The unspoken pull between them was enough. "You're unlike anyone I've ever known," he admitted finally, voice rough, filled with a vulnerability he hadn't allowed himself to show in years. "And you're unlike anyone I've ever met," she replied softly, a hint of amusement and warmth in her tone. "You carry so much, yet you don't let anyone see the real you. Until now." He leaned just a little closer, drawn to her in ways he didn't fully understand. Every nerve in his body screamed to touch her, to close the space, to let the simmering heat between them break through restraint. But he held himself back, just barely, savoring the tension, the anticipation, the quiet, dangerous intimacy that hung like a cloud over them. Amara's hand found his again, just lightly resting against his. The simple contact made him acutely aware of every inch of space between them, every subtle curve, every heartbeat. He wanted to pull her closer, to feel her warmth entirely, to let desire guide him. But he stayed still, letting the moment stretch, letting the silence and tension speak louder than words. Night deepened, the city lights casting soft reflections across the room. He realized with a mixture of awe, longing, and fear that he could not resist her. Not fully, not ever. The sweetness of her presence, the calm confidence, the subtle power she wielded without effort. It was intoxicating, dangerous, and utterly irresistible. Amara's gaze lingered on him, steady and unflinching, as if she could see every thought, every desire, every hesitation. He wanted to lean in, to close the gap, to surrender entirely to the pull between them, yet he resisted, letting the tension build, letting the anticipation stretch out like a fine thread. And in that silence, in that quiet, heated proximity, Jae-hyun understood something vital. This connection, this pull, this sweetness, this undeniable intimacy, was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was gentle and dangerous, soft and incendiary, comforting and thrilling all at once. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to truly feel, without armor, without command, without the harshness of his world intruding. The night wore on, and the penthouse settled into a hush. Yet the heat between them remained, unspoken but palpable, a tension that promised more than either dared to name. Jae-hyun sat there, fingers brushing hers, heart pounding with anticipation, and realized that whatever came next, whenever the boundaries finally broke, would change everything. But for now, they existed in the quiet, in the sweetness, in the heat that neither could resist, letting the world outside wait while they lingered in the intoxicating closeness that had become both their refuge and their temptation. The penthouse was quiet, bathed in the soft amber glow of city lights reflecting off the polished floors. Jae-hyun sat in his study, fingers drumming lightly on the desk, yet his mind was miles away, tangled in thoughts of Amara. He tried to focus on ledgers, on the calls and emails that demanded his attention, but every fleeting memory of her, the curve of her smile, the soft lilt of her voice, the warmth of her skin, pulled him away. He couldn't ignore it anymore. The pull, subtle at first, had grown over the days into something undeniable. Every glance, every shared silence, every accidental brush of her hand left him restless, his pulse quickening in ways he hadn't felt in years. She had a quiet power over him, a magnetic force he didn't understand and couldn't resist. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in," he said, trying to steady his voice. Amara stepped in, carrying a small tray with a teapot and 2 delicate cups. The steam curled upward, carrying the scent of jasmine and vanilla, and Jae-hyun's chest tightened at the subtle aroma. She moved with effortless grace, placing the tray on the desk and setting a cup before him, her fingers lingering near his for just a heartbeat longer than necessary. "You've been quiet," she said softly, voice like silk. "More than usual." "I'm thinking," he admitted, voice low and rough, "about everything." Her lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "Everything?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "Or someone?" He met her gaze and something inside him faltered. He wanted to deny it, to maintain his composure, but the honesty of her presence made that impossible. "Someone," he confessed almost inaudibly. Her eyes softened, a warmth and subtle amusement mingling in their depths. "I see," she said quietly. "And what does that someone do to you?" Jae-hyun's hand twitched near hers, drawn to the warmth radiating from her skin. The proximity, the subtle brush of her fingers, was electrifying. He wanted to reach out, to take her hand fully, to feel the dangerous, intoxicating closeness of her entirely. But he paused, letting the tension simmer, letting the pull build. "You make me restless," he admitted, voice rough with emotion he had long buried. "Every glance, every word, every small touch, it consumes me." Her smile deepened, soft and mischievous. "That's because you let it?" she whispered, leaning slightly closer, so the warmth of her body brushed against his. "You let me in, just a little." The words, the nearness, The gentle intensity of her gaze made his heart hammer in his chest. Every nerve in his body demanded contact, demanded closeness, demanded surrender. But he stayed still, savoring the tension, the anticipation, the exquisite pull between them. They shared tea in silence, yet the silence was anything but empty. Every glance, every subtle movement carried weight, every quiet gesture a spark in the slow-burning fire between them. Jae-hyun was acutely aware of the warmth of her hand near his, the soft lilt of her voice as she spoke to him, the delicate curve of her lips as they pressed into a small, knowing smile. Hours slipped by like this, the world outside fading into irrelevance. She moved through the penthouse, humming softly, tending to small tasks, while he observed, captivated. Each movement was deliberate yet effortless, a testament to the quiet confidence that made her irresistible. At one point, she returned with a blanket and draped it over his shoulders, the touch gentle and intimate. "You need rest," she said softly. "You can't carry everything on your own." The warmth of her hands, the softness of her voice, the unspoken care in her gesture. It made something inside him ache. He wanted to reach out, to close the space between them, to let the tension break in a kiss or touch that would leave them both trembling. But he restrained himself, letting the anticipation stretch, letting the slow burn deepen. "You're unlike anyone I've ever met," he said quietly, his voice raw with vulnerability. You make me feel things I haven't felt in years. And you make me feel alive," she whispered back, her eyes glimmering in the soft light. "In a way I didn't know I could." The admission hung between them, charged and unspoken. He wanted to reach for her, to take her into his arms, to feel the warmth of her body pressed against his. Every fiber of his being screamed for closeness, for intimacy, for the dangerous, intoxicating pull that had grown between them. Yet restraint held him back, the slow tension a delicious torment. He leaned just slightly closer, their shoulders brushing, the warmth of her body seeping into him, igniting a fire he couldn't contain. She noticed, her eyes flickering with amusement and desire, a quiet invitation lingering in her gaze. Minutes passed like this, each one stretching longer, each one intensifying the magnetic pull between them. He could feel the subtle rise and fall of her chest, the delicate rhythm of her breathing, the quiet power of her presence that had become impossible to resist. "Jae-hyun?" she murmured, her voice barely audible. "You don't have to fight it. You can let go, even just a little." Her words were a spark, igniting every nerve, every heartbeat, every unspoken desire within him. He wanted to close the distance, to feel her lips, her warmth, her body entirely. But he stayed still, letting the tension build, letting the anticipation grow until it was almost unbearable. As night deepened, the penthouse settled into quiet intimacy. The city outside glittered, but inside, it was just the two of them, the heat between them simmering, unspoken yet undeniable. Every glance, every touch, every moment held a promise, a tension, a sweetness that neither dared to name but both felt in every heartbeat. Jae-hyun realized, with a mixture of awe and fear, that he was losing control, not to desire alone, but to her presence, to the sweetness and danger she carried, to the slow, magnetic pull that had entwined their lives in ways he couldn't yet understand. And in that quiet, glowing room, amidst the warmth, the tension, and the unspoken longing, he understood that whatever came next, whenever the boundaries finally broke, would be irreversible. But for now, he could simply sit beside her, feel the electricity in the space between them, and savor the slow, irresistible burn that had become their secret, their temptation, and their dangerous, intoxicating connection. The penthouse was quieter than usual that night, the city lights painting faint streaks across the polished floors. Jae-hyun lingered near the window, gazing down at the bustling streets below, but his mind wasn't on business or deals. It was on Amara, the memory of her soft laugh, the brush of her hand, the warmth she exuded even in the smallest gestures. Everything about her had claimed a piece of him, a piece he didn't want to reclaim. She appeared quietly, carrying a tray with tea, and set it on the low table near him. Her presence had become a constant comfort, yet also a subtle torment, because every interaction with her was charged with intimacy he couldn't name and desire he couldn't deny. "You've been quiet again," she said softly, settling beside him on the couch. Her knee brushed his gently, deliberate or not he couldn't tell, and the heat that ran through him was undeniable. He hesitated, unsure if he should voice what had been simmering inside him, but her steady gaze, calm and unwavering, coaxed it out. I can't stop thinking about you, he admitted, voice low and rough. Amara's lips curved in a gentle, knowing smile. Then think, she whispered, leaning slightly closer so that he could feel the warmth radiating from her. I don't mind. He wanted to close the distance, to feel the pull break in a kiss or a touch that would leave them both breathless. But he held himself back, savoring the slow burn, the tension that made every second feel like a heartbeat stretching into eternity. And then, as if reality could not resist interrupting, a sharp ping from his phone shattered the quiet. A message. He frowned, scanning the screen. The name was familiar, his wife. Amara noticed the change immediately, her gaze shifting to the device in his hand. Do you want to ignore it? She asked softly, sensing the tension in his body. Jaehyun's jaw tightened. He hadn't expected her to appear so soon in his day, especially not while he was here with Amara. No, I should see what she wants, he muttered, standing slowly. Amara's eyes held a mixture of curiosity and concern. Be careful, she murmured, the words almost a whisper, yet weighted with meaning he couldn't quite decipher. He swiped the message open. It was polite, almost casual, but beneath the surface, he could sense the precision in her wording, the subtle attention to detail that always implied strategy rather than affection. Another social event, he muttered, reading the invitation from his wife. She wants me to attend. A gathering. Something about business alliances. Amara's fingers brushed lightly against his arm, grounding him. You don't have to go, she said softly. Not if you don't want to. I do, he said firmly, though the tension in his chest betrayed him. I have to maintain appearances. The evening arrived with a mix of elegance and subtle danger. Jaehyun dressed in a tailored suit, precise and commanding, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. Amara had insisted on accompanying him, her presence a quiet shield and reminder of the sweetness he had begun to crave. The event was lavish, the kind of gathering designed for power, deals, and appearances. Guests mingled in hushed tones, smiles polite yet calculating. And there she was, his wife, radiant, poised, every inch the image of perfection, with that faint glimmer of strategy behind her eyes. She greeted him with a practiced warmth, the kind of smile that could disarm or deceive depending on her aim. And behind her, subtly, almost unnoticed, a man in the shadows observed, a figure whose presence radiated quiet authority. Her father, deadly, calculating, and watching. Jaehyun's pulse quickened, not from desire this time, but from an instinctive awareness that danger was near. The subtle tension he had felt with Amara was nothing compared to the electric caution now prickling his nerves. He could feel the gears turning in her mind, the silent communication, the undercurrent of intent he had yet to understand. Amara stayed close, her hand lightly brushing against his as they navigated the crowd. Every glance she cast, every subtle smile, reminded him of the contrast between warmth and manipulation, innocence and calculation. He realized that the sweetness he had been savoring with her now carried a shield, a buffer against the games being played just steps away. The night continued in a delicate dance of appearances and hidden intentions. His wife approached, exchanging words carefully measured, every compliment layered with subtle questions, every smile a tool. He answered cautiously, aware of the tension, aware of the way Amara's presence kept him grounded, aware of the danger lurking in polite conversation. And in the corner, her father watched, silent, calculating, dangerous. The faintest glint in his eyes suggested that the pieces were moving, plans unfolding, all while the world saw only a social gathering, smiles, and champagne. By the end of the evening, Jaehyun felt drained but resolute. He had navigated the event, maintained his composure, and returned to the penthouse with Amara. She poured him a drink, her eyes reflecting concern and affection. You handled it well, she murmured, settling beside him. But something tells me it's not over. He let out a quiet breath, tension still humming in his chest. No, he admitted. It's far from over. Amara leaned closer, her shoulder brushing his, her hand finding his in that subtle, grounding touch that had become their unspoken connection. Then we'll face it together, she whispered, her voice soft but firm. And in that quiet moment, the penthouse felt warmer, safer, more intimate. The city outside remained dangerous and unpredictable. But here, with her, he allowed himself a rare moment of peace, of sweetness, of temptation and trust coiled together. Yet even in that intimacy, the shadows at the edge of his life, the wife, her father, remained. Waiting, watching, calculating. And Jae-hyun knew, deep down, that the magnetic pull between him and Amara would soon collide with the darker currents lurking just beyond sight. The morning sunlight spilled into the penthouse, soft and golden. But Jae-hyun felt none of the warmth. His mind was restless, a constant hum of tension that refused to settle. Business calls, deals, appearances. They all demanded precision, but beneath it, a subtle unease tugged at the edge of his consciousness. Amara moved through the kitchen with her usual grace, humming softly as she prepared breakfast. The scent of freshly baked bread and coffee filled the air, a small comfort amidst the storm that seemed to be gathering beyond the walls of their home. "You look tense," she murmured, placing a steaming cup of coffee in front of him. Her hand brushed his, intentional or not, sending a jolt through him. "You've been on edge all week." "I've been—" He hesitated, struggling for the words. "Dealing with things." The statement was vague, but Amara's gaze, soft yet searching, pierced through it. "You mean your wife and her father," she said quietly, almost a whisper, yet precise, as though she had already understood the undercurrent that haunted him. He started, surprised by her insight. "Yes," he admitted reluctantly. "It's complicated." Amara sat beside him, her presence a gentle anchor. "It's always complicated with people like them," she murmured. "But remember, not all complications are threats. Some are just shadows you don't need to fear." Her words were comforting, but he knew the shadows were real, subtle, quiet, and lethal. His wife had perfected her smile, her charm, her seeming devotion, but every glance, every word, was carefully calibrated. And her father, the man was a predator in every sense, calculating and deadly. The day passed with an uneasy rhythm. Jae-hyun managed business calls and meetings, while Amara hovered nearby, a quiet, stabilizing presence. The gentle touch of her hand on his arm, the warmth of her gaze, the soft hum of her voice. It all kept him grounded in a world where trust was rare and danger was always close. By evening, they had settled into the living room, the penthouse bathed in the warm glow of soft lighting. Amara brought him a blanket, draping it over his shoulders, her hand lingering just a second longer than necessary. "You need to rest," she said softly, a hint of concern threading through her voice. "The mind wears out faster than the body sometimes." Jae-hyun looked at her, the heat between them undeniable. Every small gesture, every subtle touch, every quiet word carried weight. He wanted to lean closer, to close the gap, to let the tension break in a kiss, but restraint held him back. The slow burn, the anticipation, the quiet intimacy. It was intoxicating, and he savored it. Yet the shadows from outside were closing in. A discreet phone notification reminded him that appearances still mattered. Another message from his wife, polite and precise, asking for an update on certain deals, with subtle implications layered beneath the words. Amara noticed the flicker of tension cross his features. "Do you want to check it?" she asked gently, her hand brushing against his. He nodded. "I should." The message was carefully written, designed to maintain control without seeming forceful. And behind it, he sensed her father's influence, the quiet orchestration that ensured every move was calculated, precise, and potentially dangerous. Amara leaned closer, her shoulder brushing his. "You don't have to face it alone," she whispered. "Whatever comes, I'm here." Her presence, her warmth, the subtle intimacy of their closeness. It made his chest tighten. He realized painfully that the sweetness he had begun to crave was also his vulnerability. She was his anchor, his temptation, his quiet escape from a world of calculated danger. Yet she reminded him that trust came with risk. That night, after a long day, Jae-hyun found himself pacing the study, the city lights flickering through the windows. He knew the currents were shifting, that his wife and her father were moving quietly in the shadows, and that he would soon face challenges far beyond the polished social interactions he had managed so carefully. Amara entered quietly, her presence immediately calming him. "You're overthinking again," she murmured, a gentle smile playing on her lips. "I can't help it," he admitted. "They're dangerous and clever. I need to stay ahead." She knelt beside him, placing her hands over his. "Then let me help," she whispered. "Not by fighting for you, but by being here, by grounding you, by reminding you that not all battles are fought alone." Her words, her touch, the intimate warmth of her presence. It made him realize something vital. The pull between them was no longer just desire. It was trust, it was comfort, it was the sweetness of having someone in his corner when the currents around him were treacherous. Hours slipped by in quiet companionship. They shared tea, subtle touches, lingering glances. The slow, simmering tension between them was a flame he could no longer resist. Yet he restrained himself, savoring the sweetness, the intimacy, the anticipation. And in the shadows, beyond their warmth, the quiet machinations of his wife and her father continued. Subtle, precise, ever watchful. The danger was real, creeping closer. Yet for this moment, in the soft glow of the penthouse, Jae-hyun and Amara existed in a fragile, intimate bubble, sweet, tempting, and perilous all at once. As night deepened, the city outside glittered, indifferent to the currents swirling within the penthouse walls. Jae-hyun realized that the sweetness he found with Amara was both a refuge and a risk, that the tension between them was as dangerous as it was intoxicating. And in that quiet, suspended moment, he allowed himself to savor it fully, knowing that the world beyond was preparing to collide with the fragile warmth of their connection. The penthouse felt heavier than usual that evening, as though the air itself was charged with tension. Jae-hyun paced near the floor-to-ceiling windows, city lights flickering like distant stars across the dark streets below. He tried to focus on reports in his hand, emails, business updates, but each word blurred into nothing as his thoughts circled around the subtle unease that had been gnawing at him for days. Amara entered quietly, carrying a tray of tea and small pastries. The soft clink of the cups and the warm aroma of jasmine eased some of the tension. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that shadows were closing in, moving just beyond sight. "You're tense?" she murmured, placing a cup in front of him and letting her fingers brush his hand. The contact was gentle, but it sent a familiar spark through him, one that had become both intoxicating and grounding. "I feel watched," he admitted, voice low. "Even after the gatherings, the meetings, I feel like someone is always observing, always measuring, always planning." Amara's eyes softened, but a flicker of concern crossed her features. "Do you think it's them?" she whispered, careful not to name the danger aloud. Jae-hyun nodded slowly. "My wife, her father. I've sensed it building, but I can't yet see the full extent." Her presence was reassuring, a subtle tether in the storm that threatened to pull him under. She knelt beside him, her fingers entwining with his, grounding him in a quiet intimacy that made the world outside fade. "Then don't face it alone," she whispered. "Lean on me, even just a little. Let me share the weight." The warmth in her eyes, the gentle strength in her touch, reminded him that not every battle had to be fought alone. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself a moment of stillness, of comfort, of sweetness. Yet the undercurrent of danger was impossible to ignore. That evening, as he finished reading an urgent email, a subtle pattern emerged. A tiny discrepancy in a shipment, a whispered rumor among trusted associates, a shadow of influence that he hadn't anticipated. It was enough to prick at his instincts, enough to make him realize that someone was maneuvering behind the scenes, preparing for something deliberate, calculated, and potentially devastating. Amara noticed the shift, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "You're thinking too far ahead," she said softly. "Sometimes the danger isn't in the steps you see, but in the ones you can't." Her words struck him with an almost physical force. He leaned back, closing his eyes briefly, imagining the warmth of her shoulder, the soft pressure of her hand on his. The tension between them, simmering and unspoken, was a dangerous flame, but it was also the only thing that made the world outside bearable. Later that night, Jae-hyun found himself walking through the penthouse gardens, the city lights twinkling beyond the glass. Amara followed, her presence silent but comforting, the rustle of her dress soft against the tiled floor. "You're on edge," she whispered, finally breaking the silence. "I can feel it. You need release, even a small one." He looked at her, the intensity in his gaze betraying a longing he could no longer deny. The slow burn that had been building between them, the stolen glances, the subtle touches, the quiet intimacy, pushed him to the brink. Yet restraint held him back, even as his desire roared quietly beneath the surface. "You're a dangerous distraction," he murmured, voice low and rough. "And you're a stubborn one," she teased, a faint smile on her lips, though the depth in her eyes hinted at understanding far beyond his words. "But distractions aren't always bad. Sometimes they're exactly what you need." Their hands brushed, fingers entwined, shoulders touching. The magnetic pull between them was undeniable. The world outside, with all its threats and hidden dangers, felt distant, almost irrelevant. For now, there was only the quiet warmth of shared presence, the soft tension of anticipation, and the intoxicating closeness that neither could resist. But the subtle signs of the world beyond their intimacy grew stronger. That night, a discreet phone ping reminded Jae-hyun that appearances were never truly left behind, and his wife's name glimmered on the screen once more. He hesitated, feeling the familiar knot of unease tighten in his chest. Amara noticed immediately. "Do you want to ignore it?" she asked softly. "I can't," he said, swallowing hard. "It's them, and I need to be ready." Her fingers lingered on his hand, grounding him, a quiet promise amidst the brewing storm. "Then let's be ready together," she said, her voice a whisper, yet stronger than any words of reassurance he had heard. Hours passed in the penthouse, the city lights fading as night deepened. Jae-hyun and Amara remained in quiet companionship, their hands occasionally brushing, their shoulders touching, their breaths mingling in a slow, intoxicating rhythm. The tension was thick, but the intimacy between them was thicker. A bond forged not just of desire, but of trust, care, and the subtle sweetness of shared moments in a world full of danger. And yet, even as he allowed himself this fragile peace, Jae-hyun could feel it, the currents shifting, the subtle signs of scheming that he could neither see nor fully anticipate. His wife's manipulations, her father's quiet orchestration, the precision of their planning. They were closing in, like predators circling prey. But for now, he could savor the warmth, the intimacy, and the slow burn of anticipation that Amara offered. The sweetness was fleeting, fragile, and precious, and he knew, deep down, that the calm before the storm would not last forever. The night stretched on, filled with quiet conversations, lingering glances, and subtle touches. Jae-hyun realized that the slow, simmering flame between him and Amara had become the only certainty in a world teetering on the edge of betrayal and danger. And as they sat together, hands entwined, hearts quietly racing, he allowed himself a rare moment of serenity, savoring the intimacy and trust that had blossomed between them. Even as the shadows of his wife and her father crept ever closer, preparing to test everything he held dear. The morning light crept through the blinds, casting long stripes across the polished floors of the penthouse. Jae-hyun moved through the space with practiced precision, checking emails, reviewing reports, and scheduling meetings, but his mind was far from work. Every interaction he had recently, every message, every glance, carried a weight he couldn't shake. Amara appeared quietly in the kitchen, her silhouette framed by the soft glow of the rising sun. She carried a tray of breakfast, the scent of fresh bread and coffee filling the air. Her eyes softened when they met his. "You didn't sleep well," she said gently, placing the tray beside him. Her hand brushed his arm, subtle yet grounding. "I didn't," he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "I keep thinking about the gatherings, the subtle movements. My wife, her father. They're plotting something. I can feel it." Amara's expression remained calm, but her gaze sharpened ever so slightly. "Then we need to be cautious," she murmured. "But don't let it consume you. You have me here." Her presence was a balm, yet the unease in his chest persisted. The slow burn of desire and trust between them mingled with the prickling sensation of danger that seemed to lurk just beyond the edges of the penthouse walls. Later that day, subtle shifts began to reveal themselves. A discreet call from an associate hinted at changes in shipment schedules. A whispered message in the boardroom suggested that someone was trying to gain early access to a lucrative deal. And in every instance, Jae-hyun felt the invisible touch of manipulation, a pattern only someone deeply cunning could orchestrate. Amara noticed his growing tension. "You're carrying too much," she said softly, sliding closer to him during a brief break in his meetings. "Let me be here for you. Even small things help." Her hand on his arm, the warmth of her shoulder brushing his, the quiet intimacy they shared. It calmed him just enough to think clearly. The slow simmer of their connection was both a distraction and a shield, a precious reprieve from the intricate webs being spun outside their immediate world. That evening, they prepared for another social engagement. A more private affair this time, one hosted by a key ally in the gold deal. Jae-hyun dressed carefully, every detail meticulous. Amara followed, radiant and composed, yet the subtle chemistry between them simmered beneath every movement, every glance, every smile. As they arrived, the room was polished, elegant, and precise. Polite laughter masked subtle negotiations, every compliment a careful probe. And there, at the far side of the room, stood his wife, flawless as ever, every inch the image of control and calculated charm. Her gaze found him almost immediately, the practiced warmth of her smile a thin veil over an intensity that belied the casual elegance of her stance. And behind her, partially obscured, her father observed, silent and deliberate, every flick of his eyes cataloging movements, intentions, and weaknesses. Jae-hyun navigated the gathering with careful precision, answering questions, exchanging polite words, and maintaining a composed demeanor. Every interaction with his wife was like a game of chess. Smiles measured, questions layered, hints of insinuation hidden in polite conversation. Amara remained at his side, her hand brushing his occasionally, subtle yet intimate touches that reminded him of warmth and trust in the midst of the tension. Her presence was a grounding force, a quiet reassurance that even amid calculated danger, he wasn't entirely alone. Throughout the evening, Jae-hyun noticed subtle signs. The glances his wife exchanged with key figures, the faint gestures that suggested her father was orchestrating movements behind the scenes, and the whispered conversations meant to influence and unsettle. The realization hit him. The currents were stronger than he had anticipated. Amara leaned closer as they left the gathering, her shoulder brushing his. "Do you feel it?" she asked softly. "The subtle shifts. Something is coming." He nodded slowly, heart still racing. "I do," he admitted. "And we need to be ready. But I won't let them break me. Not while I have you here." Her fingers entwined with his, her touch gentle but firm, a reminder of intimacy amid the brewing storm. "Then we'll face it together," she whispered. "Whatever comes, we'll handle it side by side." Back at the penthouse, the city lights flickered below. Jae-hyun and Amara sat in quiet companionship, the soft warmth between them a stark contrast to the subtle dangers pressing in from the outside world. Their hands occasionally brushed, their shoulders touched, and every stolen glance carried both desire and trust. Yet even in this fragile moment, Jae-hyun felt the currents of manipulation tightening. The wife's calculated charm, her father's silent orchestration, the invisible threads pulling at his life. They were real, and they were closing in. But for now, he allowed himself the sweetness of Amara's presence, the slow-burn intimacy that had become a lifeline. The night stretched on, filled with subtle touches, quiet conversation, and the delicate tension of anticipation, all while the shadows beyond the penthouse prepared to strike. And in that moment, as they sat together, hearts quietly racing, hands entwined, Jae-hyun understood something vital. The calm was temporary, the sweetness fleeting, but the connection he shared with Amara, intimate, grounding, and intoxicating, was his anchor. The storm was coming, and he would face it, but for this night, he could savor the fragile warmth and trust that had blossomed between them. The night air outside the penthouse was sharp, biting at exposed skin as Jae-hyun stepped onto the balcony, overlooking the city that glittered beneath him like shards of broken glass. He could feel it now, the currents he had sensed for weeks, the undercurrent of deception that had been building, reaching toward a crescendo. Amara joined him quietly, a mug of steaming tea in her hands. Her presence was gentle but grounding, a reminder of warmth amidst the gathering storm. "You've been restless," she murmured, passing him the mug. "What's going on?" "I feel it closing in," he admitted, voice low, rough with tension. "They've been patient, calculated, and I think tonight something shifts. My wife, her father, they've set things in motion I can't yet see fully." Amara's eyes softened, but they held steel. "Then we prepare. Not just with strategy but together. You don't have to carry it alone." The slow burn of intimacy between them flared subtly. His fingers brushed hers, their shoulders occasionally touching as they shared the balcony's quiet. Desire mingled with tension, a dangerous combination, yet he welcomed it. Amara's presence had become both his temptation and his lifeline. The phone buzzed discreetly. A message from an associate, a subtle hint of disruption in an upcoming deal. He frowned. The pieces were moving faster now, and the invisible strings were pulled by hands he could only partially see. Amara noticed, placing her hand over his. "You can handle it," she whispered. "But remember, trust where you must, question where you should." The evening brought them to a private venue, a lavish yet intimate affair hosted by one of the gold deal partners. Jae-hyun was aware that appearances mattered, but the stakes tonight were higher. Every smile, every handshake, every conversation carried weight beyond casual politeness. And there she was, his wife, radiant, poised, every motion deliberate, every glance a weapon disguised as charm. Her presence was more than a threat. It was a challenge, a test of control and patience. Behind her, partially hidden, her father's eyes scanned the room. Silent, calculating, lethal. He was everywhere and nowhere, orchestrating, anticipating, and manipulating without a single overt action. Jae-hyun navigated the gathering with careful precision, answering questions, offering words of measured diplomacy, and maintaining an air of calm. Yet each interaction with his wife was a delicate game, a verbal chess match where every word could reveal a weakness or gain leverage. Amara remained at his side, a quiet anchor. Her hand brushed his lightly, fingers intertwined with his at times, the intimacy subtle yet electrifying. She whispered gentle reassurances, grounding him amidst the tension and reminding him that not all battles were fought alone. As the night deepened, the first overt cracks in the carefully constructed calm began to show. A whispered conversation between his wife and an influential figure hinted at coordinated interference in the gold deal. Small, subtle gestures from her father indicated he was prepared to strike at the perfect moment. Jae-hyun felt his pulse tighten. The realization hit with the clarity of a blade. This was no longer a subtle threat. The web had been set, the pieces were moving, and he was now at its center. Amara leaned closer, her voice a whisper against his ear. "They're coming for you," she said softly, eyes steady and unwavering. "But I'm here, always." The intensity between them grew, subtle touches and shared glances carrying both desire and unspoken resolve. The slow burn they had nurtured became a lifeline, a reminder that even amidst betrayal and danger, human connection could be both shield and weapon. Hours later, back at the penthouse, a subtle alert in his inbox confirmed his worst fears. Interference had already begun. Deals had shifted unexpectedly, shipments delayed, communication tampered with. Someone was moving decisively, exploiting the gaps in his awareness, pushing toward a confrontation he had yet to fully comprehend. Amara noticed the change in his posture, the tightened jaw, the eyes that darted toward the faintest movement. She approached, hand on his shoulder, grounding him once more. "We face this together," she whispered, her voice firm but tender. "Whatever happens, you're not alone." He exhaled slowly, allowing the warmth of her presence to settle the storm within him, if only briefly. Desire and trust mingled, simmering beneath the surface as they shared a quiet, intimate moment amidst the gathering tension. But even in that fragile intimacy, the storm outside continued to brew. The wife's calculated charm, her father's lethal orchestration, the precision of their manipulations. They were closing in, circling, ready to strike at the most vulnerable point. Jae-hyun realized, with a weight in his chest, that the coming confrontation would test everything: trust, love, patience, and strategy. But for now, as Amara's hand rested in his, as their shoulders brushed and hearts beat quietly together, he allowed himself to savor the delicate warmth, the slow burn of intimacy, and the fleeting sweetness that the night offered. The storm was approaching, and when it broke, nothing would ever be the same. The penthouse was quiet that evening, almost eerily so. Jae-hyun sat in the study, reviewing the final details of his gold deal, the air thick with anticipation. He could feel it. Tonight would either cement his empire or unravel it entirely. Every decision, every movement had been carefully orchestrated. Yet the faint unease he had carried for weeks now seemed almost tangible. Amara appeared with a tray of tea, her movements calm and graceful, as always. She placed a cup in front of him, fingers brushing his ever so slightly. "You've been tense all day," she murmured. "Why don't you take a break?" He managed a faint smile, though his mind raced. "I wish I could. Something tells me tonight will be decisive. I need to stay focused." She set the tray down and moved closer, her presence a comforting anchor in a world that felt suddenly unstable. "Then let me at least stay with you," she whispered, her shoulder brushing his. "We face it together, even if it's just by being near." His fingers twined with hers, the slow, simmering intimacy between them grounding him. But beneath the warmth, a current of danger pulsed, invisible but undeniable. Meanwhile, his wife prepared elsewhere, her movements precise, practiced, and deadly in subtlety. She had orchestrated this evening with careful calculation, ensuring that every detail would fall into place. Her father oversaw the arrangements, silent and lethal, making sure the traps were perfect and that no variable had been overlooked. The evening began innocuously, a small, private celebration with trusted allies, ostensibly for Jae-hyun's upcoming deal. Drinks were poured, appetizers circulated, and laughter filled the air, masking the undercurrent of manipulation that ran beneath every interaction. But Jae-hyun soon felt the first sign that the night was not as it seemed. A delicate taste of the drink in his hand made him pause, a faint, unusual bitterness lingering on his tongue. He froze, eyes narrowing. Amara noticed immediately. "Careful," she whispered softly, her hand brushing his arm in a grounding touch. "Trust your instincts." Before he could react, the subtle effects began. A lightheadedness clouded his mind, the world tilting just slightly. He reached for Amara, but she too faltered, her hands slipping into his as the room seemed to sway around them. His wife's smile was radiant, flawless, a mask hiding the danger beneath. She approached with deliberate grace, her movements slow and seductive, designed to distract and disarm. "Are you feeling all right?" she asked, her tone laced with concern that was anything but genuine. Jae-hyun tried to steady himself, the warmth of Amara's hand his only anchor, but the drug coursing through their systems dulled their awareness. The intimacy they had shared, once a source of grounding and calm, now became a strange, heightened sensation. Every touch, every glance, every whispered word between them was amplified, blurring the line between desire and manipulation. The night stretched on in a haze. Unconsciously, they found themselves entwined, drawn together by both chemistry and the effects of the substances. Every kiss, every touch, every whispered moan seemed to deepen the bond, yet it was orchestrated by forces beyond their control. Meanwhile, hidden cameras captured every movement, every expression, every intimate moment. The wife's father oversaw the recording, meticulous and precise, ensuring that every detail could be used to manipulate and sabotage. His plan was flawless. If the deal succeeded, it would be at a cost no one could foresee. Jae-hyun's mind flickered, brief moments of clarity piercing through the fog. He realized with horror that they were being manipulated, yet the intensity of the sensations made it nearly impossible to act. Amara's presence was his anchor, yet even she was caught in the poisoned current. The wife's laughter, quiet and controlled, echoed from the corner. She was watching, enjoying the unfolding scene, knowing that her careful orchestration was breaking the most controlled man in the city. And her father, ever silent, observed from the shadows, calculating the perfect moment to deliver the final blow. As the night wore on, the boundaries between desire, trust, and manipulation blurred. Jae-hyun found himself caught between his rising panic and the overwhelming sensations, while Amara's soft whispers and gentle touches kept him tethered to reality, just enough to resist total collapse. In the early hours of the morning, they collapsed together on the Black Maid's bed, unaware, drugged, and entirely vulnerable. Amara's beauty and warmth, her grounding presence, had saved them from complete disorientation, but the wife's plan had succeeded. She had obtained what she wanted. Every movement, every touch, every whispered word had been recorded, ready to be used against him to spoil the deal and weaken his empire. Jae-hyun awoke slowly, the weight of confusion and disbelief pressing down on him. He looked around, realizing the betrayal had been orchestrated perfectly. Amara was beside him, her eyes filled with quiet understanding and concern, but even she could not shield him from the full impact of what had occurred. The wife's treachery was complete, yet Jae-hyun's mind refused to surrender entirely. He clenched his jaw, determination and fury mixing with the lingering sweetness of Amara's presence. This was only the beginning. He would rise, confront the betrayal, and reclaim everything that had been threatened. And through it all, the slow, simmering intimacy between him and Amara had endured, a flame that would not be extinguished, even in the midst of treachery, drugs, and betrayal. The morning light was cruel, cutting through the blinds and spilling across the polished floors of the penthouse. Jae-hyun awoke with a start, the haze of the night before slowly clearing from his mind. Panic and confusion gripped him as memories began to surface. Fragmented, surreal, yet undeniably real. Amara stirred beside him, her hand brushing his arm gently. Her eyes opened, filled with quiet concern and warmth. "Jae-hyun," she murmured softly, "are you okay?" He sat up abruptly, his chest rising and falling rapidly. The events of the night rushed back. The haze, the drugs, the overwhelming sensations that had consumed them both. But as clarity returned, so did a sharp, jagged realization. Something was very wrong. The phone on the nightstand buzzed. He picked it up, dread twisting his stomach. A series of messages and videos appeared, recordings of him and Amara from the night before. Every intimate touch, every whisper, every kiss had been captured. His wife's name flashed repeatedly, the tone of the messages cold and victorious. She had won. She had weaponized their most private moments to ruin him, sabotage the gold deal, and shatter his trust. Jae-hyun's hands shook. Rage and betrayal coursed through him like fire. She planned this, he whispered, his voice raw. All this time, she faked it. Amara's hand rested on his shoulder, grounding him, steadying him. "Yes," she said softly, eyes filled with sorrow for the pain he felt. "But you're not alone. We'll fix this. Together." He turned to her, eyes blazing. How could she? All this, everything we shared, it was a trap. She shook her head gently. "The love we share isn't fake," she insisted. "What she did, that was her deception. But us, that's real. That's trust, connection, intimacy. That's unbreakable." The weight of her words settled over him, a bittersweet relief amid the chaos. He had been betrayed, yes, but he had Amara, and her unwavering presence reminded him of something crucial. He could still fight back. Determination hardened in his eyes. He rose, pacing the room, plotting his next moves. "They think they can manipulate me, control me, ruin me," he muttered through clenched teeth. "But they're wrong." Amara followed, her steps quiet but confident. "You're stronger than they know," she said. "And you're not alone. Not now, not ever." Hours passed in preparation. Jae-hyun moved with precision, his mind sharp despite the lingering effects of the drugs. He contacted trusted allies, reinforced security measures, and began strategizing how to reclaim control. The gold deal was still salvageable, but only if he acted swiftly and decisively. And through it all, Amara stayed by his side, nurturing, grounding, and sharing the slow, simmering intimacy that had become their lifeline. Her soft touches, quiet reassurances, and unwavering loyalty reminded him that even in the aftermath of betrayal, connection could be a weapon, a shield, and a bomb all at once. Night fell again, this time with a different energy. Jae-hyun confronted his wife and her father in the penthouse, every step deliberate, every glance calculated. The wife's smile faltered, her perfect composure cracking ever so slightly under the weight of his presence. Her father's eyes narrowed, calculating, yet even he sensed the shift in momentum. "You underestimated me," Jaehyun said, voice low and dangerous. "And you overplayed your hand." The wife's lips pressed into a thin line. "You think you're in control?" she asked, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her confidence. He stepped closer, eyes locked on hers. "Control isn't about deceit or manipulation," he said. "It's about knowing who's truly loyal, who's truly strong, and I found both. My loyalty, my strength, they're not for sale." Amara stepped forward, hand brushing his. Her presence was a quiet declaration. They faced this together. The wife's father scowled, realizing that their careful orchestration had failed to break the bond between Jaehyun and Amara. The confrontation escalated quickly. Words were exchanged, accusations flung, and the subtle tension of weeks exploded into raw confrontation. Every carefully laid plan by the wife and her father unraveled in the face of Jaehyun's clarity, Amara's loyalty, and the unbreakable connection they shared. And then, in the quiet aftermath of anger, strategy, and retribution, Jaehyun turned to Amara. The slow burn between them ignited fully, tempered by the chaos but unshakable. He pulled her close, lips meeting hers in a kiss that was equal parts passion, relief, and reclamation. Every touch was intensified by the memory of betrayal, every whispered word a reaffirmation of trust. "You're safe with me," he whispered against her lips. "Always." "And you with me?" she replied softly, letting herself melt into the embrace that had become both sanctuary and battlefield. The night stretched on, filled with stolen moments of intimacy, whispered reassurances, and a quiet but intense reclamation of trust. Jaehyun and Amara moved together, not as victims of deceit, but as partners fortified by shared experience, desire, and unwavering loyalty. Meanwhile, the wife and her father were left to face the consequences of overreach, their schemes exposed, their manipulations impotent against the bond that had been forged in fire, passion, and unwavering support. By morning, the penthouse felt different. Not just restored, but renewed. Jaehyun and Amara, though exhausted, were victorious. The gold deal, though threatened, remained salvageable, and the intimacy, trust, and desire they shared had been tested and strengthened. As sunlight spilled across the room, they sat together, hands entwined, bodies close, hearts racing yet steady. The slow burn between them, once a subtle undercurrent, had become the defining current of their lives, sweet, intense, and unshakable. Jaehyun looked at Amara, a mixture of love, desire, and gratitude in his gaze. "You saved me," he murmured. "No," she replied softly. "We saved each other." And in that quiet, golden morning, amidst the lingering shadows of betrayal, the warmth of victory, and the lingering heat of passion, Jaehyun realized something vital. Love and trust, once forged, were stronger than deception, more powerful than betrayal, and infinitely more intoxicating than the fleeting games of manipulation played by even the most cunning adversaries. Their lips met again, slow, sweet, and full of promise. In the aftermath of chaos, desire, and treachery, they had found something that could never be stolen: each other.
Hello besties, in this story we learned that trust and mutual support are priceless and that betrayal may hurt but resilience and true connection empower you to rise above it. Thank you so much for watching. Can you like, subscribe and share?